Funding for this podcast is provided in part by the IPM Network through the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture and by various commodity groups through checkoff dollars, including the United Soybean Board, National Corn Growers Association, and Cotton Incorporated.
The I See Dead Plants podcast shares the stories of people and plants, pests and pathogens, and the conflicts among them. Join us as we speak to the folks who attempt to solve complex problems with plants through pest management research. I See Dead Plants is an extension-based podcast created by the Crop Protection Network and the North Central Integrated Pest Management Center and hosted by Ed Zaworski.
Welcome back to the I See Dead Plants podcast. As always, I'm your host, Ed Zaworski. Today, I'm joined all the way from California at UC Riverside by Dr. Mark Hoddle. How you doing, Mark?
I'm great, Ed. Thank you for having me on today.
So the impetus for having this podcast was I was scrolling around on Twitter like I do sometimes, and I saw an article about Mark, and I think it was titled like the Indiana Jones of entomology, or Entomology's Indiana Jones, and then I got to reading it, and I was like, man, I got to reach out to this guy, and like a lot of times when I'm about to reach out to somebody, I get a little nervous, and I'm, especially when somebody says, hey man, this guy's the real life Indiana Jones, I'm like, certainly this guy's probably way too busy to have a conversation with me, but Mark replied to me right away, and I was like, oh man, this is great. But he works on biological controls of a lot of insect pests, and he's it sounds like you've got on some adventures in doing so. So that's kind of what our conversation is going to be. We're going to be talking about a specific pest, the South American palm weevil in specific. But I think, before that, I want to ask Mark a little bit about some of his adventures and how he was coined by the reporter that interviewed him, the Indiana Jones of entomology. So before we get into that, I just want to introduce Mark a little bit. He got his bachelor's at the University of, is it Auckland?
Mm-hmm. That's right, in New Zealand.
In New Zealand, and he got his master's there as well. Went on to get his, the bachelor's was in zoology, and so was the master's. And then he went on to get his PhD at the University of Massachusetts in entomology. And he's currently a biological control specialist and principal investigator at the UC Riverside, and also directs the Center for Invasive Species Research. All sound about right, Mark?
Yeah, you're right on. Thank you.
Good. I got my stalking correct. So, Mark, I like to do some warm-up questions, and I'm really excited about it in this case, like I said. Right. So, first question I got for you is, how did you come to study insects?
Yeah, so insects have been something that have interested me ever since I was a small kid. So with my grandfather in the garden, we used to look for a large cricket-type insect in New Zealand called a weta. It's one of the largest or heaviest insects in the world. And since New Zealand has no native mammals, this cricket evolved into quite a large size. There's numerous species of them in New Zealand. Basically, it filled the niche of a mouse. So those were always big, scary-looking things to find as a kid, and we'd keep them in terrariums, feed them carrots and other things. So fascinating to watch. And then, as I moved through into high school, we were asked to do science projects, and, I used insects, ladybugs and aphids to demonstrate population control. And then when I got to university, man, I could not believe there were classes offered in entomology. And even more mind-blowing to me was that you could actually get a career as an entomologist. And back in the old days, when you actually had to meet the professors and sign up for some of these classes, one of the entomology professors at the University of Auckland said, what interests you about insects? And I said, control, I think, seems kind of important. Maybe there's some jobs, associated with that. I think I'd be interested in that. And he goes, oh, yes, of course. So you want to be an economic entomologist? I said, oh, yeah, that sounds very profitable. That's exactly what I want to do, be an economic entomologist and work on important pest problems. So that basically was, the straight line with my career. I haven't deviated from that. So when I got to university, bachelor's, master's degree, then on to the PhD, it was always pretty clear to me what I wanted to do. So I had none of these dilemmas about what am I going to do with my life. So it was pretty much a straight track for me.
That's awesome. I rarely get to hear that. Always asking similar questions to that, and so I love to hear when it's from an early age. Looking around. I'm gonna have to look up that insect.
Yeah. Oh, they're impressive. Giant wetter, it looks absolutely amazing. Beautiful, big armored type insect. Not that I could keep those as pets, but because they're endangered
Oh,
in the
gotcha.
sanctuaries. But we could find common tree wetters easily enough in hedgerows and
Hmm.
that type of thing. We'd flick them out and pick them up and put them into the terrarium.
So, how did you make the transition into specifically studying biological control agents in insects?
Yeah, so as part of my classes back at the University of Auckland, we were sent off to the library to, find an article that you were going to report on back to the class. And in the olden days, before everything was digitized, the library used to have displays of the new journals that had come in, that week. So as I walked in, there was a journal there called Trends in Evolution and Ecology, TREE. And on the cover were two photographs side by side. A lake in Papua New Guinea completely infested with a floating aquatic weed, Salvinia molesta. And then underneath it, the same lake, pretty much completely cleared out of the weed
Hmm.
with a photograph of a small weevil that was responsible for that, an amazing control of that devastating weed. And it's just like, I couldn't believe that something like that was possible over such a large area and that it was going to be a permanent solution for that weed. So that was the article I summarized and presented, and then realized that biological control not only applied to weeds, but learned that you could also use it against insect pests. So my master's work was on the biological control of a weed in New Zealand called gorse. It's a spiny, nasty thing from Europe, which has taken
Hmm.
over tens of thousands of hectares of land, farms, and in forests. It's a problem here in parts on the west coast, up in northern California, all the way into
Hmm.
Oregon. But my PhD work at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst was on the biological control of whiteflies in greenhouses. So that pretty much sent me down the trail on insect biological control, which I currently do here at the University of California, Riverside.
Gotcha. As I was researching your background, I was kind of seeing, man, you've worked on a lot of different insects and different biological controls. Like, what are some of the highlights? I don't know. We don't need to have a complete comprehensive list, but what are some of the insect pests that you've worked with?
Yeah, so that diversity is really a reflection of the problem that we have not only in California but a lot of places in the United States. We get a lot of invasive insect pests arriving each year. So we did a recent dive into this, and California's getting about 10 of these non-native invertebrates establishing each year in California, and about
Hmm.
3 of them become problems. So about 30% of them require some type of management. And sometimes those pests may be amenable to biological control. So I'd look for those targets, seek either state, commodity, or federal level funding to go over those pests. So yeah, the diversity is huge. The countries of origin are diverse as well. So we've had really big projects in Pakistan, for example. I was over there
Hmm.
for 3 years in Punjab, looking for natural enemies of the Asian citrus psyllid, which spreads a bacterium here which kills citrus trees. It's been a devastating problem in Florida. The natural enemy we found and brought back, did the safety testing, demonstrated it was safe for release. We've reduced psyllid populations by over 75% in California now, and that's been a tremendous program for the state. And I might sound like I'm bragging here. Maybe I am. Actually, look, I'm patting myself on the back. Um, the densities of these psyllids now are so low that I think we probably won't get wiped out with that lethal citrus disease, Huang Long Bing, which has been so devastating
Hmm.
in Florida. So our citrus industry, I'm feeling, has a bright future right now, at least with respect to Asian citrus psyllid and Huang Long Bing. Other pests we've worked on, I've done a lot of work in Mexico and Guatemala because we have a large avocado industry here. Mexico and Guatemala are the evolutionary centers of origin for the avocado tree, and they have a huge biodiversity of native insects associated with those plants, and we know almost nothing about them.
Hmm.
And then what we're going to get onto today, palm weevils. I've spent a lot of time in Southeast Asia, Saudi Arabia, South America, Central America, Mexico again, working on these palm weevils, which have now, well, at least one of which, South American palm weevil, has established in California's doing an immense amount of damage to our ornamental palms, but a potential bigger future problem will be the threat it poses to the edible date industry out in the Coachella Valley. And this is a very important desert crop in a relatively rural area, actually very rural, where job opportunities aren't that great. So, potentially it could have a big impact on the economy out there, assuming the South American palm weevil attacks and kills palm tree, date palms in the same way its relative, the red palm weevil, has done through the Middle East, where it's been a devastating problem in date plantations in Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and parts of Northern Africa as well.
Gotcha. I'm sure, Mark, that in your travels and studying these different insects, you have a lot of stories. Do you have any kind of like highlight reel stories for my listeners? Like, I don't know, cool places, unexpected experiences, like.
Yeah, I do actually. That's why they called me the Indiana Jones, because it's talking to the reporter about the stuff that we've done and the experiences we've had. And by we, I mean my wife, Christina, and I have done a lot of this work together, which has made these long overseas trips for 6 to 8, maybe sometimes 12 months at a time to work on some of these problems. It's been able to do that because the responsibilities at home just weren't there. But now with kids, all that's changed. But anyway, the kids can speak pretty good Spanish, and so we've been taking them to Mexico, Guatemala, and Colombia with us to work on some of these problems. But anyway, so a very memorable experience Christina and I had was working in the citrus orchards in Pakistan, where we were looking for natural enemies of Asian citrus psyllid. So originally the way we did this work was that we had, under the orders of the governor of Punjab, we pretty much went everywhere with the elite Punjabi commando unit. And these guys were dressed in, they looked like paramilitary guys dressed in black. They actually really did have AK-47s and, fully decked out in full combat gear, sirens, big security vehicles. So wherever we went, we'd have all this commotion around us. Oh my God, the sirens, and just it would draw so much attention to us when we were working in these areas. And they were worried about the Taliban and somebody else, like kidnapping the Americans and the white people from the United States, holding them for ransom or whatever. And then there'd just be a huge political problem associated with that. That's why we were under this heavy, armed guard. So after a few of these events, it's just like, look, this is not worth their time. It's definitely not worth the resources. We do not feel threatened here at all. And you bring so much attention to us. We just don't need this. So after some negotiating, they acquiesced and agreed, okay, just go on your own. Whatever happens to you is your decision. So good luck. So anyway, so after that, we'd just travel around in a beat up minivan that the university supplied to us, the University of Agriculture in Faisalabad. So we'd show up, a few people would turn, what are you doing? Super friendly. We had interpreters and translators with us, mainly students from the university Department of Entomology there that were helping us. But anyway, so this one day, Christina and I, we've collected all these twigs that have the Asian citrus psyllid on it. And they've been parasitized by the parasitoid we were looking for, Tamarixia radiata. And it's hot. And a lot of these citrus orchards, they intercrop wheat between the citrus trees. So we found a shady place under one of the trees. We crushed down the wheat, and we were sitting under the tree, but nobody could see us. And we're very close to the road, which is basically a double-lane dirt road running past an absolutely massive irrigation canal that would bring all the water out of northern Pakistan up from Kashmir and bring it down to the Punjab to irrigate. If you fell into these things, you'd be washed away. They are extremely scary, and I didn't like getting close to them, and I especially didn't like walking across little rickety bridges that would go across these things. If you fell in, you'd be swept away, and the concrete sides were way too steep to be able to be pulled out. But anyway, so we're sitting under these trees. Nobody knew we were there. It was almost like a voyeuristic insight into the lives of people going up and down the road. Some old guy comes by on a rickety old cart that's being pulled by a donkey, whistling songs, kids with their mums walking up and down. We just saw all of this life, intimate life.
Yeah.
Through this hidden position under these citrus trees. Those memories, the sounds, the colors, yeah, burned into my memory forever. It was just such an
Hmm.
amazing, actually, yes, an amazing experience, but also an extraordinary privilege to have been given the opportunity not only to work and live in Pakistan for quite a while, but to actually get snapshots of life
Hmm.
like that, in these rural areas, and people just not knowing that we were there doing what we were doing. So yeah, a super special memory, that one.
Man, it sounds amazing. Yeah, there's not a lot of professions, I think, that you get to immerse yourself like that, I think, right? And
Yeah, so yeah, you're exactly right. So that's one of the great things about being a biological control specialist. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of the pests that we deal with in California, it's true for the rest of the United States too, is that they're not from this part of the world. They've originated somewhere else. They've come to this, continent, North America, often unintentionally, either hitchhiked or maybe they were contaminants on plants that were brought in. They blow up. Great climate, lots of food, lack of natural enemies allow the populations to spread quickly, densities increase rapidly, ecological and economic damage accrues over time. So a big part of my job is to go back to the area of origin for these pests and see whether or not they have natural enemies that we could use to suppress population growth. And if we can find those natural enemies, hopefully the level of suppression is sufficient enough that it reduces either economic or ecological damage.
in general, Mark, I'm just kind of curious, like when you're going to the point of origin for one of these invasive pests, I mean, are you, maybe it's different from situation to situation, but like, are you relying on local academics to help you kind of point you in the right direction? Are you just trying to immerse yourself in the habitat that pest is from? Like, just in general, I'm just curious, like, what's the process from
Yeah.
a mile high view?
Right. Okay. So I'll go back to the Pakistan story because it's really interesting. Okay. So Asian citrusillid has a natural range that, people think probably extends from about Afghanistan right through to the southern parts of Southeast Asia. It sweeps down through Indonesia. And I've been to a lot of those areas, didn't go to Pakistan, but it's an enormous area, right? It's like, oh my God, where do you even start looking for natural enemies in this massive range? So we did something called climate matching, where we looked at the citrus production areas in California, figured out what the climate was. So the idea was, if we were going to find a natural enemy to bring back to California, we'd like to bring it from a climate in the area of origin that is similar to California. So, it's adapted to really hot summers and pretty cold, damp, in some cases, in the Central Valley at least, foggy winters. So you can use these climate matching programs. Climax is the one I used. It searches this massive range, it runs all these algorithms, you tweak it with the parameters that you're looking for. And it came back saying, well, maybe you want to look at Punjab, Pakistan. It's about a 70% climate match with the major citrus growing areas in the Central Valley. Just go, okay, that's great. Well, who do I know in Pakistan? Well, nobody, obviously. So I was discussing this with some of the faculty here on campus, and they told me to go down to the botany department and talk to a guy called Mike Roos. So I went down and said, hey, Mike, what's up with Pakistan? People said you know a bit about it. He goes, oh, yeah, right. Yeah, I had a grad student from there. He's currently the chancellor of the University of Agriculture in Faisalabad. Here's his email address. Why don't you get hold of him? By the way, he studied citrus with me too. He's very well aware of the citrus greening, or the Huanglong Bing disease that's threatening California. So I got hold of Ikra Khan and I said, Mark Hoddle here, UC Rivers. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Please come over tomorrow and we'll make sure absolutely everything you want will be laid out for you. No problem. And what was fascinating about seeing that system was just how different it is here.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
To the United States, because, if things weren't going well for us, or people weren't fulfilling their obligations to the project, it can be hard to, get that situation sorted out. All I had to say was, it hasn't gone well. You've slipped up on this. We were supposed to do this today. You weren't here on time. I'm having dinner with the chancellor tonight. I'll have to tell him about this. And immediately, so 180-degree change in the attitude on just about everything. And the department chair, Dr. Jalal and I would joke about this. He goes, "Oh yes, we call that the hot water treatment around here." So you get stuff done like that. It was great. So those collaborative projects, I think, really emphasize the international linkages that universities like UC Riverside and, all these big, well-known campuses around the United States have developed these international relationships. And I think the power of those is that you never know when you're going to need them,
Yeah.
but they are there when you do. And the folks that have been trained here and then have gone back home again, are incredibly grateful for the opportunities they have had here with, the experiences of living in the United States, obviously the education system, and then being able to take all of that learning back to Pakistan, wherever, Mexico, for example, even Guatemala, and then you reach out and say, "Hey, I need a hand." And it goes, "Yes, of course, we're here ready to help, no problem." And the doors are thrown open and you're given the red carpet treatment. That project never would have been possible, I don't think. It would not have been anywhere near as successful if we just hadn't had that UC Riverside, University of Agriculture, Faisalabad, through the connection made through the chancellor there. And the other benefit of that was, we trained a graduate student in Pakistan. Zaman came over here for about 3-4 months, something like that, worked on the Asian citrus psyllid project with us. We went back, we met him over there. He would help us with the field work and the studies in Pakistan, which really provided a lot of insight into how these systems are different. We probably ran one of the most comprehensive studies of this insect in its native range, Punjab. We were able to make really interesting comparisons to what we were seeing here in California, and that those international linkages that never would have been possible.
Do you need to keep up to date on new pests or pests that may be moving into your area? Pest Alerts focus on new pests, pathogens, and weeds that are popping up in the North Central region. Check out the North Central IPM Center's Pest Alerts page and stay a step ahead.
That's a really good message or mention that I don't think about a ton, but yeah, anybody that I went to grad school with or professors that I had classes with or worked with on projects, the academia in general and graduate school is a great place to make connections that you never know how you might use them later. Cause anybody that I went to grad school with for even, one course's amount of time, if I see them at an event, if I see them at a APS, if I see them at a meeting, they remember each other, you instantly can strike up conversation. And that's a good message for people listening, especially if you're a grad student, just,
yeah, definitely
network as much as you can.
Yeah,
you never know.
I look at these linkages, have through Southeast Asia, right through into the Middle East, a lot of contacts in Mexico, Central and South America. I look at this and I think, the money that's been invested in me to do the research, that's one product, and it's a very important product. But I think a very underappreciated and perhaps a far more better investment has been the fact that now I have, very old, a Rolodex of contacts, right? It's an old term. You go look up Rolodex, anybody looking at this. And then almost like a library of knowledge of areas in these countries where very few of us, entomologist type folks have gone into work. This is not tourist stuff from like sitting around in some resort, picking bugs off a bush that's growing in the around the swimming pool. I mean, we're out there doing it.
Yeah.
We're in the, if you want to, I don't mean backwaters in a derogatory way, but we're off the beaten path doing this stuff, and we're seeing really what's going on in real life rather than the sanitized versions that you get through the travel magazines and that type of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I It's dangerous, Mark. I think I could keep asking you or listening to stories personally, but before I get on to the South American palm weevil, the last question I wanted to ask you, and then I've got kind of a fun fact that I learned from my wife last night. But do you have any adventures coming up? Or I shouldn't say adventures. Do you have any research coming up for biological controls?
Yeah, so next week, or the end of next week, I'll be heading back down to Uruguay to work on the red palm weevil, which is not native to Uruguay or South America. It's native to Southeast Asia, and it's been especially devastating in the areas that it's invaded after it was accidentally moved out of its home range through the, the export and the selling of infested coconut palms that were used to decorate hotels and other areas throughout the Middle East. So this insect, somehow, we don't know how it's managed to invade Uruguay, but it is just doing an absolute immense amount of damage down there. The concern is it's going to get into some of these native areas and just really start destroying a lot of these native palms, which have huge cultural, economic, and natural significance, in those areas. So the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization has organized a training workshop, and I've been asked to participate in that. So this will be my second trip down there. The first one was to, get a feel for what was going on and talk to a lot of the officials in Uruguay and figure out, what's possible and what needs to be done. But obviously it's a problem that can't be contained within Uruguay. The risk is it's going to expand out of that country and then start moving through the continent. So now the push is to develop an international coalition that can help manage this problem, hopefully while it's still contained somewhat in a relatively small part of Uruguay. And then part of that program is that we have and this relates to South American palm weevil, have an interesting program going on in Brazil where there's a parasitic fly that attacks the larvae and pupae of South American palm weevil. They may have some potential for use here in California, but just as importantly, it almost certainly will probably attack the larvae and pupae of this invasive red palm weevil that's now in Uruguay. So it'd be really cool to see if we could forge a linkage between Brazil and Uruguay and begin, assessment as to whether or not their parasitic fly from Brazil has potential, which I think it probably does, and could help control this red palm weevil invasion into South America. So yeah, that's something that I'm looking forward to.
That's awesome. World traveler.
Yeah.
Mark, before I get into the main topic of discussion, last night I was telling my wife, I usually I've been thinking about these podcasts a lot, building up to them, and I usually talk to my wife, over dinner about them, and she was like, who are you interviewing tomorrow? And I said, a guy named Mark Hoddle from UC Riverside. He was coined the Indiana Jones of entomology. And she goes, well, do you know that the guy that they based Indiana Jones off of is from her hometown of Beloit, Wisconsin? And so I was like, I was like, okay, I got to look this up. And she was getting a little irritated, like, oh, you're fact checking me. You don't believe me. And it's like, no, I just want to know a little bit more. And so I looked this guy up. His name was Roy Chapman Andrews. And, I think there's some debate as to whether or not this was the guy that they based him off of. But I think the people of Beloit, Wisconsin are like, oh, yes, it definitely was.
Folk hero.
But, I read a little bit. He went on a ton of, he really wanted to be involved in the American Museum of Natural History after he graduated from school. And I guess the story was that there were no openings. So even though he studied at university to go do this, he said, I'm going to go there and become a janitor. And he joined an explorers club. He went on all these adventures worldwide. I think he was studying mammals and stuff while doing so. And then he eventually became the director of the American Museum of Natural History. So he moved up from a janitor position to the director eventually. And I was like, man, that in and of itself is a pretty cool story. So whether or not that is the basis of Indiana Jones, it was pretty cool. And
that is cool. I agree. See, drive will get you a long way if you stick at it.
Yeah.
Got to have grit. Got to have grit. Just keep going.
So anyway, thanks for all that background, Mark. I hope folks listening to it enjoyed. Let's talk the South American palm weevil. So as with a lot of other plants or crops that I talk about on the podcast, I try to do a little bit of background on that plant or crop. And with palm, it's easy for me. I know nothing about it. What is the importance of the palm tree in California, Mark?
Yeah, so there's really two answers to that question. The first is that palm trees are a significant defining feature of the landscape here in California. You land at LAX, LA International Airport, everybody expects to see palm trees, and of course there are palm trees all over the place, lining the roads. They make, large, showy displays around shopping malls, that type of thing. In-N-Out hamburgers here, it's pretty well known. Everybody goes there. Their logo is two palm trees sort of crossed over each other. So, they define the landscape, and then we have a native palm, Washingtonia foliifera, out in the desert, which forms these incredible, palm forests around desert oases. And there's some magnificent examples of these in like Palm Canyon out in Anza Borrego. And then economically, that ornamental palm industry, some estimates suggest it's probably worth about $75 to $100 million a year. Palms are a big landscape business here. We've got our native palm, which obviously defines some of the natural areas. And then we have an edible date industry out in the Coachella Valley, which really is, if anybody thinks of the desert, hot, sandy, that's the type of place where these palms grow. And we know from experience with the red palm weevil, which is a different species to the South American palm weevil, both incredibly, which are native to tropical jungles, seem to have flourished in xeric desert habitat. So the ecological amplitude of these insects, the ability to tolerate, climatic conditions and habitat, you just would think would be inhospitable to them. They seem to have not been so bothered by that. Working in Saudi Arabia, out in the deserts, it's exactly what you imagine it to be. It is sand to the horizon in every direction, and it is incredibly hot, depending on the time of year that you're there. So, some mornings we would do our field. We would start at 3 a.m. We just wanted to be finished by, 6:30, 7 o'clock before the sun. Like one of those science fiction movies, you're like, oh my God, the sun, I can see it's coming up over the horizon. It's like, hurry up and finish. You got to race back to the car before you get incinerated by the sun. And part of that too, man, we experienced some of those massive dust storms that would roll through the desert. Those were just exceptionally terrifying because the sun would turn red, the dust, even with stuff wrapped around you, these big scarves we would wear around our faces and the sunglasses, and you had to get out of there fast and just barricade yourself into a building until they had passed. So another sidetrack, but anyway, so those are the three big things that concern me about the South American palm weevil invasion into California: the ornamental palm industry, our native palms, which unfortunately there's really no protector of those. They fall into Bureau of Land Management, federal and state parks, and often those native trees, plants, bushes often have no champion, trying to protect them. Unlike the edible date industry, obviously there's a lot of growers. It's probably worth $125 to $150 million a year industry out in the Coachella Valley. They have a grower organization that has some political clout, so they could probably manage to get some support. Wealthy people, politicians, or whatever, in these urban areas, you start seeing their palm trees dying because of the weevil. They don't like that. The expense to remove one of these palm trees is a lot. I was talking to one of these big arborists. He told me the other day they had to take down a palm that cost almost $10,000 to remove because it was huge. It was behind the house. A lot of risk of it falling over into the swimming pool and breaking it and landing on the roof of the house, cracking it. He told me in some instances, after they've cut it up, they've actually had to use a helicopter to lift the big chunks up and out of these properties to get rid of them. So, people don't want to be paying $10,000. And on average, just the normal 30, 40, 50-foot palm tree in front of your house, which you can easily get access to with a chainsaw, it's going to cost you the better part of $2,000 to $3,000 to cut that thing down and have it taken away. We're looking at like maybe 20 or 30,000 of these palms now have been killed in these urban areas by the South American palm weevil. Now, people are upset about that. They're having to pay a lot of money to have them cut down. And a lot of the areas where the palms are, iconic because of the look that they might give a particular shopping area or around sports stadiums or through some of these big public parks like Balboa Park, for example, defined by palms. Now you're on the insecticide treadmill. These guys are going to have to be applying prophylactic neonicotinoid systemic insecticides every 4 to 6 months. You may be looking at 2 to 3 applications at least a year, and you're looking at a couple of $100 each time those trees are treated. And talking to Disneyland, the San Diego Zoo, and that they're going to have to make decisions now. Which palms are they going to protect forever? Because you stop treating, they become food for the weevil. And which palms are they going to sacrifice and just let the weevil kill? It's like a roll of the dice. Some of those vulnerable palms may escape attack for a very long time, maybe forever, who knows? But just as probably even more will be found and taken out, and then they have another management issue to deal with, as well as, changing the landscape that people come to expect to see. It's like, well, what happened to all those palms? They're gone now.
Yeah, I think anybody listening, it's odd. Like, I think, I shouldn't speak for anybody listening, but I know I've never really been around a palm tree, but I can picture exactly what you're saying. Like, I've seen photos, and especially when you give the image of like the native palm and these oases, especially with the dust storms, like I feel like I've probably only seen something like that in a movie, but I feel like I'm right there with you.
Yeah. So one of these botanists that, who's quite famous, made his career on palm trees, he calls palms. I really love this when he said this at a meeting. Palm trees, yes, the big game of the plant world. Like huge, iconic. Everybody can identify a palm tree, right?
Yeah.
Like looking at a lion. Trees, you've got no idea what they are. It could be a maple and oak. People just go, it's a big green tree, but a palm? Oh yes, everybody can tell you that that's a palm tree.
Yeah, it's like what do they call like elephants and like charismatic megafauna, right?
Exactly, that's right.
As far as now, okay, we got a good background on palm. The South American palm weevil. What are we talking about here? What does it look like? What does it do?
So a weevil is a type of beetle, and there are really two types of weevils. Weevils that have short noses and weevils that have long noses that almost look like an elephant's trunk. We call that a rostrum or a proboscis or a snout, and we are dealing with a long-nosed weevil. So some of the short-nosed weevils, some of your listeners might be familiar with, could be something like, I think, boll weevil, for example. A cotton pest is a short-nosed weevil. Listeners in Florida might be familiar with Diaprepes root weevil, which attacks the roots of several, economically important plants, including the roots of citrus trees. But we're dealing with a long-nosed weevil, so the males and females have long snouts. It's a very characteristic feature of these insects. The adults are actually quite big, looking at least 1.5 inches in length, jet black.
Wow. And
it's now the largest weevil species that's present in California. So the long noses on these weevils, the females use those to drill a hole into the top of the palm tree. And once she's made that hole, she then has an egg-laying tube that we call an ovipositor, which will stick out of the back end of her abdomen. And she'll sort of walk around with that tube extended, tapping until she finds the hole that she's just drilled, and then she inserts her ovipositor into that hole, puts the eggs in there, covers the hole up, and then her egg-laying job is done. The males also have a long snout, but on top of their snout are all these setae. It's kind of bristles, it's like a moustache or a beard, but instead of growing on the underside of the chin, they're actually growing across the top of the nose of the weevil. We don't really know what the function of those setae are, but we think they're chemosensory, and it may have something to do with responding to host plant volatiles and probably the aggregation pheromone which males produce. So they release this volatile compound, the males do, which attract males and females to palm trees. So it's basically a signal to say, hey, I found a good palm tree. I think we'll all be happy here. Why don't you fly in? We'll start breeding, laying some eggs, and we'll kill this thing together.
Hey there, I See Dead Plants listeners. Just a quick heads up, our sister podcast, War Against Weeds, has some great new episodes out, and certified crop advisors can now earn up to 1 CEU just by tuning in. It's a super approachable show with down-to-earth conversations and practical info you can actually use in the field from the weed experts themselves. If you haven't checked it out yet, now's the perfect time. Just visit cropprotectionnetwork.org/CCA-CEU-quizzes. Pick any War Against Weeds episode that offers CEU credits, take the quiz, it's that easy. Where can this insect, I mean, you already talked a little bit about, I think you said it was from...
Oh, yeah, no, sorry, yeah, so this one, the black one that we're dealing with here, the South American palm weevil, as its name suggests, it's obviously not native to California, so its native range actually extends from parts of Mexico right through Central America into parts of South America, and there are populations in the Caribbean as well. So it's really a sort of a Mexico, Central, South American, Caribbean delineation. That's the home range of this pest. So the question is, how on earth did it get to California, right?
Yeah.
Well, so this is kind of a bit of an interesting story. So part of the native range is Mexico, and California shares a border with parts of Mexico. But immediately below California, in the southern part of the state where I'm based, there's a long, skinny peninsula called the Baja Peninsula.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The palm weevil was not native to that part of Mexico. Then around 2000, there were reports of South American palm weevil killing palm trees down near Cabo San Lucas, which is a really popular tourist area at the very tip of the Baja Peninsula. People go down there to go sports fishing. It's a big party town. Yes, I've been there. I've done the big
Not
game fishing.
I
sort of gave it a pass on the partying stuff, but anyway. So 10 years later, that weevil went from the very tip of the Baja Peninsula. It made its way up to a city a lot of people may have heard of called Tijuana.
Mm-hmm.
And those infestations were literally just 5 kilometers south of, or a couple of miles south of the California border. So 2010, it was killing palm trees in Tijuana. I got a call from a guy that I know down there. He said, hey, there's something bad going on here, man. Our palm trees are dying. What was so ironic about getting that call is that exactly at that time in 2010, we were dealing with another palm weevil invasion into a very small, wealthy enclave on the coast in an area called Laguna Beach, which is in Orange County. So Cristobal said, dude, that palm weevil that you're dealing with in Laguna Beach has come here into Mexico and it's killing our palm trees. I said, I can't understand how that has happened. But I said, I'll come down and have a look. So just take a couple of steps back. Laguna Beach is a small coastal town. It has no international airports. There's no international seaports.
Yeah.
How on earth did a black weevil with a bright red stripe down its back show up in this small town killing palm trees? We didn't even know where in the world it had come from. So I'll just fill you in on this. So Christina and I, we did all this weevil collecting basically through Southeast Asia, Indonesia, all through up into Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, Malaysia. We went all over the place, Philippines, collecting these weevils to try and figure out where did this Laguna Beach invasion come from. So it turned out it came from Indonesia. But Indonesia is massive, and there's thousands of islands throughout Indonesia. Fortunately for us, we collected weevils with the help of a cooperator from one island called Bali, which happens to be a popular tourist area. We were there because it's a popular tourist area. It's easy to fly in and out of. It's a good access point to get to other places with Indonesia. Yes, the weevils there, we collected them. Excellent. Question is now, how on earth did that weevil from Bali in Indonesia arrive in Laguna Beach? There's no airports, there's no seaport, there's nothing there. And what we learnt during this visit to Southeast Asia is that the larvae of these palm weevils are a delicacy. People will pay a lot of money to buy these from commercial palm weevil farms. That's exactly what they are. You can go there. So we were talking to people about this. It's a delicacy, Some people would actually cut down palm trees in the forest and just allow the weevils to colonize them naturally, and then they'll harvest their own larvae, but some people don't have access to those lands, so they go to these weevil farms to buy them. And talking to folks there through a translator, they were willing to pay more per pound for weevil larvae than you'd pay for chicken down the road at the local chicken guy that was selling it on the side of the street. So we thought, okay, well, maybe somebody deliberately bought those palm weevils to Laguna, Southern California, to basically establish a food source that they can't get here. We have no evidence for that.
Yeah.
I even put up a Facebook page, trying to say, hey, where can I get palm weevil larvae from? Anybody help me with that in Southern California? Hoping to get a bite on that, but nobody picked up on that. So anyway, we were dealing with that Indonesian palm weevil invasion at Laguna with help from the California Department of Food and Ag and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. We were trying to contain it, and obviously we wanted to eradicate it. Yes, we did contain it, and yes, we successfully eradicated it. But while all our focus was on that palm weevil from Indonesia, Cristobal calls me up and says, hey, that thing that you're dealing with in Laguna Beach is now here in Tijuana killing our palm trees. And I found that really hard to believe. But I went down and had a look, and he showed me the palms. And yes, they had the characteristic death signature. These palms look like giant brown mushrooms or just big brown umbrellas. So we climb up into the palm trees, and I'm looking for the adults, and we're pulling all the stuff out of the center of the palm, and I pull out these big black weevils, and I go, hang on a minute, this thing doesn't look like the weevil we're dealing with in Laguna. That thing in Laguna is black, yes, but it's got a bright red stripe down its back. These are all black. There's no red stripes on any of these beetles. So then we got hold of some weevil taxonomists, and they, compared both species. We had the DNA, and they go, oh yeah, okay. That thing you're dealing with in Laguna Beach, it's called Rhynchophorus vulneratus. Oh, the one in Tijuana is Rhynchophorus palmarum. So yes, you are dealing with two different palm weevil invasions at the same time. I don't think that has ever happened anywhere in the world, where we had one coming in through the Pacific coast, and then we had another one sneaking in through the back door from Tijuana. And unfortunately, the resources and the personnel at the time were only, able to deal with one invasion, which resulted in the eradication of the Indonesian weevil. But that allowed an opportunity for the South American palm weevil to come into California, where it eventually established around 2014, 2015 in the southern part of San Diego County, and it's just subsequently spread from that initial infestation point.
I never know what I'm going to get into. I never know what backstory I'm going to get. And I did not know it was going to be that interesting. So hang on. I just want to clarify for both myself and my listeners. So you had the one from Indonesia with the red stripe on its back.
Yep.
And then you have the South American palm weevil that's essentially working its way northward through Central America. And that's the one that we're talking here today. Right. You mentioned earlier that there was another weevil. I think you said something red?
Yeah, the red palm weevil.
So that one's different from these other two that we just talked about, right?
Yep. That one's Rhynchophorus ferrugineus, and that has been a global invader. Gotcha. So native to Southeast Asia, very close in range to the Indonesian weevil. But amazingly, even those two species seem to have a pretty clear delineation in Southeast Asia, which was amazing to me when we were doing the collecting and then the subsequent DNA work. But that opened up a whole other area. There is actually a line that's demarcated through Southeast Asia, where on one side of the line you have a certain group of species, you cross that line, and they've speciated into different groups of species. And I didn't know that until we started this work. And this weevil, these palm weevils were a clear example, depending on whether you're north or south of that, geographic line, as to whether or not you're dealing with one species or the other. So, yeah. So the South American palm weevil is the one we're dealing with here in California. The red palm weevil is the one that's native to Southeast Asia, that's now widely established through the Mediterranean, North Africa, and the Middle East. It now has a foothold in South America. And that means there's going to be not only the South American palm weevil present there, but there's now also the red palm weevil present there. So you have an Asian species that has now successfully invaded South America. You have a South American, Central American, Mexico species that is now established here in Southern California. They're all tropical in nature. They all feed on palm trees. And as I mentioned earlier, both, well, I guess definitely the South American palm weevil and the red palm weevil do just fine in the desert. Hot xeric. So if you take an even bigger step back and you look at just how insanely ludicrous this whole situation is, humans have, we've created entirely this problem that we're dealing with right now. There never used to be all these palm trees here.
Okay, yes.
And the species complex now that we have artificially created with palms from South America, Central America, palms from Africa, palms from the Canary Islands off the coast of Africa, the bizarre mixing of all these species that, have been separated from each other probably for tens of millions, I don't know, maybe hundreds of millions of years. I don't know. I'm not much up on palm taxonomy.
Sure.
But we've created these very bizarre assemblages of palm species from around the world, put them in habitats where they never used to grow, obviously, and probably weren't really well adapted to at any rate, and we water them. And we keep them alive. So basically, we have created habitat, inhospitable xeric habitat that the palm weevils do extremely well in. And I think, and it may be reasonable to assume that, and at least I am, is that once they're inside the palm tree, it's like living inside a thermos.
Sure.
They are insulated from extreme heat. They're insulated from extreme cold. Once the larvae are in there feeding on the meristematic tissue at the top of the palm, this is where all the new palm fronds grow. They create a very distinctive mash, as they start digesting and grinding away all this palm material. It's very warm. It's extremely moist. I mean, the bowls that they carve out in the tops of these palm trees during the feeding on this meristematic tissue, it fills up with water. All this water's been translocated from the roots, obviously runs up through the trunk. Now there's no meristem there or developing leaves to sort of like take the water away to supply the fronds. They're literally swimming around in a fishbowl in the tops of these palms. And I said, how on earth these things don't drown in this liquid? It's unbelievable. And it has such a distinctive fermentation. And that's the thing that really amazed me about it. The smell of that stuff.
Yeah.
It, at least to my nose, it smells similar, whether I'm in the Middle East, whether I've been in Southeast Asia, down in Brazil, or here in California, which makes me wonder whether or not these weevils are utilizing very similar, microbes, whether their microbiomes are extremely similar. They have these sort of mutualistic relationships with a similar suite of microorganisms that help them to ferment and probably partially digest this rather nasty food that they're growing on. It's not like eating an apple, like a codling moth or something like that, sweet and juicy. This stuff's pretty damn nasty. It's incredibly fibrous and pretty tough. And I wouldn't be surprised if these bacteria that they carry around, or whatever these endosymbionts are that help with the fermentation and just probably extra oral digestion, if you want to look at it that way, of their food source, enables them to do really well in what you'd think is not such a great plant to feed on. But having said that, humans eat palm hearts too, but those palm hearts are specially grown from a particular species of palm tree, and they're harvested at a time when the palm hearts are obviously very soft, and we cook them to eat.
Man, it's the perfect storm, it sounds like. I got a couple of follow-up questions, Mark. I mean, I'm kind of thinking through, you mentioned like, all right, we're bringing palm trees from all over the place. We're crossing them, and I don't know, whatever you want to say about palm taxonomy. I'm curious about the South American palm weevil. I'm assuming that there's palms native to South America that are adapted to tolerate this thing, but then as it moves into these areas like Southern California, it's hitting the jackpot, right? Basically, with these palms that are not. Right?
Yep, that's exactly right. So one of the most vulnerable palms that we see not only in California, but also throughout the Middle East, for example, and especially around the Mediterranean too. There's a palm tree called Phoenix canariensis, and that palm tree is native to the Canary Islands, and it has no weevil predators there. And of course, once it's translocated outside into these areas where it gets exposed to these palm weevils, it's extremely vulnerable to damage. And without doubt, it is by far the most preferred species of palm that these palm weevils go after. They just really love it, and they devastate it. Now, after the red palm weevil invaded Europe and did so well in the Mediterranean, unfortunately, it successfully invaded the Canary Islands. How on earth that happens is not clear to me, but I think, it must have been transportation of infested palm material from mainland Europe into the Canary Islands. And now it's threatening a native palm here on the Canary Islands. And those palms form palm forests on the sides of these volcanoes. And amazingly, after a lot of work, that red palm weevil was successfully eradicated from the Canary Islands. It's also been the red palm weevil has also been eradicated from the Caribbean after it invaded Aruba and Curacao. It's also been eradicated from Mauritania, northern Africa. We in California, we eradicated a related species, that red striped palm weevil, Rhynchophorus vulneratus from Indonesia. So as we turn our eyes south to Uruguay, there is a precedent here for eradicating infestations of these palm weevils. And hopefully with the red palm weevil invasion into Uruguay, we may have a chance of containing it and getting rid of it before it infests the whole of the South American continent.
Another follow-up question that I'm wondering about, Mark, is with regards to just weevils as a grouping of insects. Like, I know the weevil that I know that's near and dear to me is just the acorn weevil that we have on a lot of oak trees here. But I mean, in general, is there kind of like, I'm assuming there's weevils all over the place, all over the globe, associated with tons of different plants, tons of different sizes. Like you said, the difference between a long rostrum and a short one. I mean, I don't know is that all? Does that all sound about right? I guess with regards to like weevil diversity.
Oh yeah, weevils they're in a family called the Culinary, and they are a hugely speciose group of beetles, and they are incredible in the diversity of lifestyles that they have, the types of foods that they can feed on. So you're right, Cuculio can feed on those acorns, but there are other species that specialize on the pods of legumes, for example. That's also a long-snouted weevil that'll drill a hole into a pod, lay its eggs inside the pod. The colors, the diversity of form that the basic weevil ground plan has evolved into, it's just mind-blowing. You go into these museums and you look and you go, my God, look at the colors on that. Not only do they have a long weevil snout, but my God, the legs are so bizarre looking on those things as well. And the metallic, they're just stunning. And I think that's probably a reason why they're popular with a lot of insect collectors. Weevils are just cool. They look really cool, just from their weird shape to some of the striking colors and, extra doodangles that they've evolved on their bodies. They just look awesome. So and these palm weevils are great to work with because often I'm working with insects that are very, very tiny. You need some magnification gear to look at them. But these big palm weevils, they're charismatic looking. Some of them are species of very pretty, very pretty colorations and markings on them. And it's hard not to sort of like be kind of fond of them at the same time while you're crushing them under your boot.
I totally get that. I actually went to my first ESA meeting last November in Phoenix. And I spent a lot of time looking at they had vendors there selling pinned insects, and I was like, this is amazing. Oh my gosh. I got to get away from this. I got too many hobbies already.
Don't become a weevil collector. Might bankrupt you.
But going back to the South American palm weevil, and I guess palm weevils in general, like you mentioned, like they're using their rostrum to lay eggs in the meristematic tissue at the top of palm trees, and then. So you said, is it mostly the larvae that's doing the damage and killing the tree? And then I guess, yeah, how is it killing the tree?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So yes, so the female uses that rostrum. She drills the hole into the plant up near the apical meristem, which is the rapidly growing area of the palm where all the new fronds come out of. She puts her eggs into that hole that she drilled. Those eggs hatch after a few days, and then the larvae, which are really legless grubs, they're just basically a sack with a mouth. They feed, and then the damage that they do to that meristematic material at the top, the palm heart, up in the crown or the corona of the palm tree, eventually results in death. The palms can't recover from that type of damage. And for your listeners who might not be familiar with a palm tree, if you kill the top of it or cut it trunk, it doesn't sprout anywhere else. It's pretty much dead, kind of like a pine tree, right? You cut the pine tree off at the ground, it doesn't sucker or produce any more growth. And palm trees, once the very top of the palm has been damaged, they're dead. And for your listeners, you may not be aware of it, but palms are monocots. They're like grasses, so they don't have sort of like the vascular setup that you're familiar with dicots. Instead, the vascular bundles are kind of randomly distributed throughout the trunk of the palm, so they don't have those nice growth rings that you'd see if you did cut down a pine tree and look at it. So yeah, so we're basically dealing with a weevil that's eating, I guess you could jokingly say, a very large blade of grass.
Gotcha. Sorry, I had another random one that popped into my head that I was trying to hold on to. You mentioned that the larvae are a delicacy.
Yes,
and I was just curious, have you tried them?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes. No, I've eaten them raw out of the palm trees.
Oh yeah.
They're fine to eat. And the head capsules, chewy, so just spit that out, and then after you sort of like crunch them up, all the guts and that you've swallowed that stuff, you'll be left with cuticle, the shell of the insect. You can just sort of gulp that down or spit it out. And you can go to these weevil farms, which we went to, and one of the owners of the weevil farms, prepared weevil larvae for us. And look, they were great. We had them in a stir fry with vegetables, tremendous. When we were in Indonesia working in the oil palm plantations there, looking for that red striped palm weevil, we'd go out with the workers, take the chainsaws, cut down some infested oil palms, cut the tops open, dig the larvae out of them, bring them back to the kitchen where we were cooking them. And one of my favorite ways of having them prepared was that they would cut the heads off them, blanch them very quickly in boiling water, lift them out, and then deep fry them. And if I gave you a plate of those weevil larvae deep fried and you ate them and I didn't tell you what they were, you'd say, hey, geez, that's some of the best calamari I've ever eaten. Those things are damn delicious. So yeah, so there you go. So yes, but for me personally, what I prefer the most, especially if I'm eating them raw, are the pupae. And the weevil larvae, when they get ready to pupate, they will then go into the base of the palm fronds, and they will use the fibers in the base of the palm frond to spin an extremely tightly wound up cocoon within which they pupate. So you can crack those open and pull out the pupae. They're very soft because they haven't, molted into the adult form. Their integument or their cuticle, their skin, hasn't been melanized, so it's quite soft. For me, and they're full of fat, they need that fat for the energy that they're going to use for metamorphosis. That's the energy that's going to drive that transformation process. It's like eating a cube of butter. Really, really pretty good. So yeah, for me, I preferred taking the pupae, rinsing the dust off them, and just eating those raw. Those are for me, that was the delicacy more so than the weevil larvae. But the reason the farms don't sell those weevil pupae is that it's an extra step where you have to provide all this pupation material to spin them up, and then you'd have to crack open the cocoons and pull them out. But you can just get the larvae, which you can take straight out of the mashed up palm material that they're feeding on. It's much simpler, easier to harvest, count, and people just cook them up just fine. Yeah.
So you mentioned the actual adult beetles were about an inch and a half long. Is it the same for the larvae?
Yeah, the larvae are probably bigger than
Oh.
the adults. Yeah,
Oh,
so
okay.
they might be up to 1.75 inches. Some of the giant ones you can see maybe close to 2 inches. So,
Ah,
like I said, they're basically a head with a mouth and a gut. They're just a bag that eats. And then the adults, obviously, after it's just like a butterfly, right? They go through the larval stage, so caterpillar or a grub. They spin up a cocoon or a chrysalis, depending on what you're talking about, moth or butterfly. Undergo metamorphosis, which in itself is just an incredible transformation process. So you go
hmm.
from basically a sac that's consuming food to an insect now that has wings and legs and gonads. So now these insects, after they've metamorphosed, they can fly around, they can walk, and obviously they can mate and lay eggs. So you have these two really distinct life stages. The larvae, which really can't do much, move very far, they just eat, and then you transform into another state that allows you to not only breed and lay eggs and mate, but can travel long distances if you're an adept flyer. To me, that whole life cycle is pretty mind-blowing, really, to go from a legless, fat eating machine to something that can walk around, fly, and create infestations somewhere else, and just look nothing like the grub.
Mm-hmm.
You think of a caterpillar that changes into a butterfly. I mean, just not only the shapes, but
Yeah.
the colors, everything. The lifestyle is just, to me, that is just an absolutely incredible transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, my coworker just brought in some pupae of some of those tomato hornworms from his
Oh
garden
yeah,
that changed into
sure.
that sphinx moth, and that yeah,
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
it's crazy.
But that's an amazing moth. I still remember clearly seeing one of those for the very first time in Massachusetts in the evenings. I'd never seen a sphinx or a hummingbird moth before, darting around the flowers with its tongue sticking out, taking nectar from the flowers. We don't have anything like that in New Zealand.
Oh no.
It's just mind-blowing to me. I'd never seen anything like it. So, of course, you had to catch some of those and put them in my insect collection because you had to hand in a pretty detailed collection of insects, so like 500 insects or something we had to collect and identify to hand in for our taxonomy class. So, yeah, that was a very cool one to catch.
This concludes part 1 of my interview with Dr. Mark Hoddle from the University of California, Riverside, talking about his work with biological control agents and specifically the South American palm weevil. Make sure you tune in next week for part 2. Thanks for listening, folks.
I See Dead Plants bridges the gap between plant science research and the impact it has on our daily lives. It is brought to you by the Crop Protection Network and the North Central Integrated Pest Management Center, which are both partially supported by the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture. For more information on today's topic or other pest management issues, check out our show notes, cropprotectionnetwork.org or ncipmc.org. Remember, this information is for entertainment purposes only. The statements made in this podcast should be interpreted within the limited context of the particular topics being discussed. Contact your state extension program for local information on pest management. For the full non-discrimination statement or for accommodation inquiries, go to cropprotectionnetwork.org/about. Music written and recorded by fellow plant pathologist Sean Toporek. Thank you for listening to I See Dead Plants.